When people ask you about your teaching philosophy, well, they don't actually really ask you unless it's your undergrad program or you're up for Teacher of the Year. So my teaching philosophy was something that I said, that I really believed in, but I didn't think a whole bunch about. So my teaching philosophy was by Rabindranath Tagore, and he said that teaching is the lighting of a lamp. And a teacher can never truly teach unless they continue to learn, because a lamp can't light another lamp unless it continues to burn its own flame. And I believe that, and I still believe that a great deal, but I've definitely changed my teaching philosophy since this whole crazy COVID thing started. For me, it was an easy thing to explain to people why I think it's important that I find joy in learning with my kids, why I sort of seek the light in all of the darkness of what education can sometimes feel like, that I get joy from learning with them and watching them learn, that my interaction with them is the light of what teaching is, so that was my teaching philosophy for a long time, was that I saw my job not as a filling of a cup, but as a lighting of a passion. But this last year, I've decided that my teaching philosophy has changed. I'm much more Heraclitus in nature. So Heraclitus is famous for saying that you can never step in the same stream twice. And that makes sense, obviously, because if you're putting your foot into a stream, even if it's similarly the same stream, it can't be the same stream because the water is different as it moves throughout the land. And that whole idea about learning and growing and constantly changing, that's really what my teaching philosophy has become. That I have to rethink everything that I thought I knew about where the focus of language arts should be. I come from a very artistic background. My dad was an art teacher for 32 years. And so I started to re-examine, where is the art part of language arts? Where do we go in regards to this constantly changing environment of what language is supposed to do and how language is supposed to interact with us as individuals? How do I teach my kids to think critically about that? And where does the artistry belong? Where does it go? But what if it didn't have to go? What if teaching and learning is more about the idea of becoming more fluid, like Heraclitus' stream, that what we learn and how we learn has to constantly change? And COVID kind of taught me that as a teacher, that I have to be able to constantly learn and constantly change with my kids. And it wasn't always fun. But that's actually a good thing, because now we're finding that neuroplasticity is far more important than any of the things that I could possibly teach them in my language arts class. And so I wanted to bring it back to the idea of using the vehicle as a way to teach critical thinking skills, because that neuroplasticity is going to serve them more in the long run than memorizing anything that can be tested on a standardized test. So my teaching philosophy changed. I went from someone else's quote, which was a very good quote, to my own understanding of what it means to be a good teacher. And that's asking myself on a daily basis, is this creative learning? How do I foster in my class fluidity of learning and fluidity of teaching and fluidity of response? It's not a long sentence. It's not the words of someone else. These are my own experiences. And what I have learned is that I have to be fluid with my kids, just like their learning has to be fluid, because that's really going to get us to that place of true knowledge attainment, to be able to sort of go along with all of the new demands of the, upcoming technological century. So I had this great epiphany, and like all great epiphanies, it was painful. Just like with Plato's allegory of the cave, right? You walk out of the darkened cave of ignorance into the sunlight of enlightenment, and your eyes hurt and you're overwhelmed, and everything seems so new and interesting, but also very frightening. And I realized that, what I had given 16 years of my life to public education hadn't quite caught up yet with what is going to be needed for our kids. The ability for them to use art in something outside of the text, that me sitting down and teaching them the classics, which is very important for American literature because everyone's got an opinion on that, isn't necessarily going to help them as much in the long run. And frankly, especially after the whole thing with COVID, where we were basically having them rely on technology all day long for their learning, it was a bit of a losing battle. So now, in addition to trying to teach them classic American literature, and to think critically and to be creative, I'm fighting against a machine that, is far more entertaining and far more interesting than I can ever be. So the question then becomes, how do I stop fighting something that I know I'm going to lose to? I can never be as interesting as TikTok. I can never be as fascinating as whatever question the school is buzzing about at that time, and in turn is buzzing on that kid's phone as he's supposed to be reading Gatsby, but actually he's, reading all of the message boards and things like that. It's a losing battle. And frankly, it makes kids feel as though they are being subjected to education, which is the opposite of what I want to do. So how can I use the idea of creative thinking and creative learning and make that fluidity and have it help me in my own classroom? Not in abandoning Gatsby, I'm still teaching Gatsby. I love it too much, like there's no way. But how does Gatsby relate to all of this? How can I have Gatsby sort of talk to these ideas? How do I reignite their passion? How do I get that flame again? And going back to me as a teacher, how do I get my own flame back? How do I reignite my passion for, what it is that I teach? Because I really do love teaching this stuff. I love teaching this age group and these kids, but right now they feel lost and I feel lost. So how do I bring back the creativity of learning? How do I bring back that spark? And that's when I had that epiphany that, I realized that my teaching philosophy, just kind of like the modality of writing itself, the old-fashioned way that we write, it's become outdated. I think about the way that I have kids write in my classes, and I'm sure to them it feels like they're writing with, a pen and ink quill, that they've got, they're writing these things that they're never going to use because the way that we communicate has changed so drastically, and how do I have conversations with them about the idea of, power and are books like The Great Gatsby the same as writing with ink, pen and ink quills? Like, is it completely outdated? I needed to bring them back to see how Gatsby and classic literature all relate to the learning and how that is fluid. So I had to adjust. I had to adjust myself. I had to adjust my expectations, and part of me went back and adjusted my understanding of that original philosophy. If I wanted to get them to learn in a meaningful way, I needed to learn too. And I needed to dive in, and I needed to be ready to fail, and I needed to be ready to be uncomfortable and to take feedback. So that's what I did. I started teaching myself how to create these vision boards that I used to do in expo markers, but now I'm starting to do them using a platform that's like a drawing tablet, and what's really interesting is the kids pay more attention when I do sentence diagramming on the tablet as opposed to if I were in person. So even when we're in person, I will do stuff on the tablet and project it, and maybe it's just something about them watching the little cursor move, but they are more interested, and if that's what sparks their fluidity in learning, then I'll take it. So taking a little bit of the classic and bringing it into the present and making sure that it relates to, what it is that they're doing. And I think more importantly, they get to see me mess up. And that's part of it too, and maybe that's why I've rebelled against this whole idea of standardized testing as much as I have, and in the painful ways that I have this year, is that I truly think that the fluidity of learning that's necessary, the critical thinking skills that are necessary for our kids to glean in order for them to be successful in a technological future, means that language itself can't be this dead thing that exists in a book like Gatsby or, on some scroll somewhere. It needs to be something that is fluid just like them and their learning, and they have to be able to relate to it on their own understanding and be able to take their opinions and adjust their opinions, and that ultimately is going to affect their neuroplasticity, their brain. So I found when I circled in on where my teaching philosophy met the idea of art and art's belonging in the classroom, that I didn't have to fight the technology as much. You know, me being willing to learn a whole new technology with my kids and letting them see me fail and, letting them see me fall and still try to get better every single time. And it's a light bulb moment for me, and it was a light bulb moment, I think, for a lot of them, is to be able to say, not everything she does is great, but she's definitely putting forth the effort and trying. And I think that's what inspires them the most. Teaching is a delicate balance between giving them the curriculum that they need and sort of inspiring them to be creative and inspiring them to be critical thinkers, but also having them see you as a human being and creating those relationships and saying, look, I'm willing to try to draw a light bulb that doesn't look anything really like a light bulb, but I'm trying to teach you. And so maybe that's worth something. And I think that that's the main thing, is that we have to be fluid in our expectations of ourselves and of what learning is. And we have to plug into that within our kids and that within ourselves. And that really is the sort of song and dance of what teaching is. And I think that that's a lot more than just lighting a candle. To me, it's being part of a greater thing other than myself, which is why I love teaching, is that I see it as not a calling, but, darn near close. I think that, ultimately the fluidity of learning and creative learning is what's going to be the new 21st century skill. And that means that public education needs to change. And we need to back away from the notions that we have said in the past make us comfortable and what we think learning is. And we need to re-examine what learning actually is. And public education needs to change.